I'm with Elana Heideman from Israel Forever Foundation, and we're talking about Purim. Elana, what is Purim?
Purim is the celebration of the Jews' survival of the attempt to annihilate them under Haman, who was the right-hand man of King Ahasuerus, the king of Persia. And in his attempt to kill all of the Jews, it was foiled by the wonderful Queen Esther and her cousin Mordecai, who stood up for Jewish rights even back then.
Is this a biblical holiday?
It is not a biblical holiday, actually. It comes from the writings of Jewish history, which not only Jewish history, by the way, it's been documented by other cultures throughout history as well. But it is from the time period when the Jews were living in exile after having been expelled from the land of Israel and Jerusalem.
Is this a joyous and happy holiday?
Oh, well, Purim is the most joyous and happy holiday because we get to celebrate how the Jews outlasted the enemy and how we survived the attempt yet again to murder us off. And so especially this year, Purim is going to be a difficult holiday because it's supposed to be very, very joyous. And yet we are a country and a people in mourning. And on Purim, we're supposed to even celebrate to the point where we don't know the difference between Mordecai and Haman, between Mordecai, our people who helped to save us, and Haman, who tried to annihilate us. And so this year, we really know that Haman is Hamas. And so the joy is there, but it's going to be a difficult one this year, I think.
Especially when you've still got people who've been kidnapped and are still in Gaza at the moment.
Yes, it's a very, very painful reality that the entire country is coping with, the entire of the Jewish people and all human beings with a heart in the world. I think that most of the desire to feel sympathy for the people of Gaza, it's very difficult when you know that they were celebrating on October 7th, on 9/11, on every terror attack that takes place against the Jews, the celebrations took place. So instead of feeling only that sympathy, I think Purim this time of year gives even non-Jewish communities around the world an opportunity to understand that we are living a repeat, not necessarily of biblical history, but of biblical proportions in human history.
I was just going to ask, do you see a parallel with Haman trying to destroy the Jewish people and also Hamas today, and Hamas's charter wants to wipe Israel off the map?
Not only Hamas, I would have to say. I definitely see a parallel. We have actually in the Torah, we do learn about the importance of remembering Amalek. And this is the body of people who came chasing after the Israelites after they had been freed from slavery in Egypt. And they intentionally targeted the young, the elderly, the women. And Amalek is not one group of people. It is in each generation the bloodline of hate that goes through all peoples who seek the blood of Jews, who seek the destruction of Jews. And so, yes, there's very much a parallel with Hamas being the embodiment of Amalek, but we have to look also outside of just Hamas, and we have to look at the people who are excusing Hamas and their behavior, or excusing the rapes and beheadings and burnings of babies. So they are not Hamas. Some of them are simply pro-Palestinian. Some of them may wish they were doing good for the Palestinians, but in fact, their movement today is based on the same ideology of Amalek and Haman and Hitler before, since then, that they only want a thirst for Jewish blood.
Do you read the book of Esther during this time?
We do. The book of Esther is the recounting of the entire tale when the king called his wife, Vashti, to the king's court for a party, and she refused, which, by the way, today is held up as a model of feminism, that she refused to be shown off for her beauty. So the king decided that he was going to host a ball and find a new bride. And this young woman, Esther, her name had been Hadassah, and her name was changed to Esther because of her being hiding her identity. Esther comes from the word hiding, and she was chosen as the most beautiful, and luckily she was, so that she could have the king's ear and convince him that the Jewish people are worthy of human rights and human dignity, and she saved the Jews. So Mordecai in the book of Esther, we know, he says to her on that day, maybe it was for this that you were born. And I think each one of us right now, living in a post-October 7th world, are forced to say, for what are we born and what can we do as human beings in a world where inhumane behaviors are being excused? For what are we born? For what are we on this earth? Each one of us, Jew, Christian, even Muslim. I look at some of the Muslims, even Muslim friends that I have, who I feel sorry for them, that their whole identity, their whole faith is being co-opted by extremists, and even they are too afraid to speak out. So every single one of us today has an obligation to read the book of Esther, read about Jewish rights, because by the way, she also does ask the king for permission. Do you give permission for the Jews to defend themselves and to retaliate for the murder, for the attempted murder of our people? And that is what the Israel Defense Forces is doing today. They are doing what is necessary to uproot the terror, the infrastructure that has been allowed to grow amongst Gaza. And while my heart goes out to all innocent beings, if you have allowed terror to grow amongst you, then you have to understand you will suffer the consequences as well, just as any community under Nazism or other isms in previous generation, and Palestinianism, the Hamas isms, all of these extreme isms are very, very dangerous to us. So the story of Esther should be read by everybody.
When you read the story, do people boo when they hear this
Yes.
about Haman, and do they cheer when they hear about Mordecai?
So whenever we hear the name Haman, we do have what's called a grager in Yiddish. It's a noisemaker. And we also have a traditional food, which is what's called the Hamantaschen. And it's supposed to be like Haman's hat or Haman's ear, depending on which culture you come from, but across the board. And this year, you see in Israel, Hamastaschen. So now people are, because why do we make them? We make them so that we can eat the ear, eat the hat, like, Davka, we beat you. You tried to kill us off, but we won. And so the same thing this year. Hamas is trying to kill off not only Jews, but Israel in its entirety. And our job is to make sure we, bite their ear off and make sure they are not able to continue their violence campaigns.
So this is a special food that you eat every Purim, but it's slightly different this year because of Hamas.
It is, and we do eat it every Purim. There are certain foods that are very traditional, actually, in the Mizrahi communities, those communities that come from the Arab countries. They have something that's a nest. It's like made with the flour. It looks like a bird's nest, and they put nuts inside, and the idea being that, we're collecting the eggs of our future. Every single Jewish community throughout the world has developed various foods that associate with the story of Purim, with the idea of survival, and also with the idea of the celebration of the joy of Jewish life. And I do think that that's very important for everyone today. The holiday of Purim happens in the month of Adar, and the Adar is known as the month of joy, so that even a family who's supposed to be in mourning is supposed to kind of minimize their sorrow. And Israel right now is an entire nation in mourning. And it's very, very difficult, but we're going to do what we can to minimize the sorrow and raise the hope that we're fighting that same fight and we will survive as well.
How long does Purim last for?
It's only a one-day holiday, so it starts at night, as almost all Jewish holidays do. At night, we read the Megillah, the Book of Esther, and then we read it again in the morning as a community. The festival goes throughout that full day with a seudah, a meal, and everybody is just going in parades, and there are parades around the country. This year, however, they have made a insistence that there be no fireworks, no major noisemakers, because of the tremendous amount of PTSD, not only of our soldiers, but actually of the citizens themselves, because of the ongoing sirens and missile fire all throughout the country, and so many people having experienced it. With the displaced communities, you have 65,000 Jews who have been displaced from their homes, from their communities, either on the southern or northern border. So because those people are now here, they're here in Jerusalem, they're in Tel Aviv, they're in Beersheba, the Dead Sea, and Eilat, and then they're in other communities too, but those are the primary ones. Reminder, they've been evacuated from both borders. You don't know who around you is suffering that PTSD, that trauma. And so they have requested, and the beautiful thing about Israeli society is that it will be honored. I can't say, forgive me, I don't believe it will be honored by the Arab community, which often during Ramadan they do have celebrations at night. And there's been a big fear for people who live nearby Arab communities. How will you distinguish? So, we live in a complex world, in a complex country, and aren't we grateful that Israel does everything she can to defend the rights of all of her citizens, Jewish and non, allowing us to celebrate and to also find respect for one another.
How do the children celebrate?
Everybody gets dressed up, especially in our schools. They get dressed up for like a whole week. But on Purim, everybody gets dressed up in a different costume. This year, I think probably we will have more IDF soldier costumes than ever before as our heroes of the day. But the costumes are a big part of everybody's joy, big parties, big celebrations. And it'll just be interesting to see how we have it this year. It's going to be a tough time.
All the way through history, we've seen people want to destroy the Jews. Haman, Hitler, and Hamas. Do you think this is a spiritual battle?
Very much so. I think that not only a spiritual battle for all of humanity, I think it's a spiritual battle for Jews in particular who are struggling wherever they live in the world on how do they sustain a Jewish identity if perhaps maybe they don't understand correctly the conflict that we're facing. They feel that hate is rising against them everywhere, not just from Hamas here in Israel. Hate is everywhere throughout the global street. And so Jews everywhere are afraid. The spiritual battle that's taking place is one of all of humanity, though. So Jews being forced and reminded, even those who thought they were assimilated, that they are Jews and that it doesn't matter what color we are because we're every color, and where we live because we live everywhere, and what business because we're in every business because that's the way Jews love life. The spiritual battle, though, is do you see that what is happening to the Jewish people and to Israel today is a battle for Jewish destiny and the destiny of the continued existence of a people. So some Jews are finding themselves religion again. They're going back to synagogues, or they're finding it just within their families because they're not confident to go to synagogues because synagogues keep getting attacked. There are 178, I think it was just reported, 178 bomb threats on synagogues just in the United States, and that's since October 7th. That does not include any that are not reported, which happens. That does not include the schools who have had bomb threats, the kindergartens who have, but none of that is, getting news attention because everybody feels awful that Israel is bombing Gaza. So all of the spiritual battle is bound up. And I think that the spiritual battle for humanity is right now on the line, much like in the time of Sodom and Gomorrah, that we have to realize you either choose good and you choose to stand with Israel, or you stand with the rapists. That's it. It's got to be that simple. Either you believe it's okay to put a baby's body in an oven, or you don't. And right now, October 7th is being referred to as the rehearsal. And we know these events are being called for everywhere. October 7th, again and again, in the home of every Jew. This is the beginning, and the whole of humanity has their own survival, not only spiritual, but it's on the line. Either you stand with Israel and you stand with the Jews, or be cursed. And that's what's going to happen as the history continues to unfold.
After the brutal terror attack on October the 7th, have you been surprised at the anti-Semitism that has been taking place? We're seeing from the river to the sea, even portrayed on Big Ben. We're seeing people ripping down posters of hostages. Has it shocked you and surprised you?
I wish it shocked me. Sadly, I think that we've had so many signs for the last decade that all of this was going to explode, that a lot of people, all they needed was something like an October 7th to show their true colors as being supporters of terror, as long as the victims of terror were Jews. So I am not surprised. I am surprised by how quickly that wave of hate is spreading to what we would not otherwise have considered moderate groups. I think that that is shameful. I think the idea that they can call for the genocide of Jews openly in the streets with no consequence is one of the biggest battles people need to figure out an answer to on how to fight it. Because if free, from the river to the sea, again, calling for the murder of Jews, and it has been declared that from the river to the sea are words of genocide. It's on Big Ben, and there was no legal action taken. There was no resistance to it. They are being legitimized again and again. Just yesterday, there was a young man in London at a pro-Palestinian rally, and he held up a sign that said Hamas is terrorist, and he was arrested. So we now have the police force and the security forces all over the world defending the rights of those calling for genocide and lying about a supposed genocide taking place in Gaza when we know that the numbers do not at all support any such claim. We know that the facts do not support any such claim. And it's very important for every single one of you out there listening that you recognize what is propaganda and what is fact, because Israel and the Israel Defense Forces are sharing every possible fact of what military does that, by the way? Who tells the world, we're going to take this military action? We have taken this military action. They are so transparent, and yet even when we give truth, evidence, visual evidence, recordings, the Gaza aid, and what's happening is a disaster. What is happening? The facts are there. But because it's Jews, people are not willing to stand behind the need to defend them. And I think that more and more people need to realize it and to say your spiritual battle is at stake here as an individual.
Do Jews feel safe in the world today? I know that there's anti-Semitism abroad and the Jews should come back to the land here, but the Jews also feel safe in Israel. You've got the Gaza war, so you've had rockets and attacks from Gaza. You've got the north with Lebanon constantly firing into Israel. You've got the Houthis down the south. Do you feel safe personally?
I feel safer here than I feel anywhere else in the world. I had to travel to the United States for a week for the benefit of my children, who have been living for 4 months at that point in war, and they needed the strength and solidarity of their family. Being abroad, everywhere I went, I felt afraid. Every step I took. I turned the corner from my parents' house and I see, prayers for Gaza everywhere. And of course, even Jewish institutions are now hesitant to put up an Israeli flag because they keep getting bomb threats, they keep getting threats of attack. So a Jew right now in the world does not feel safe anywhere. The Jews are having conversations with their neighbors. Would you hide me if the need arose? I think that more Jews need to be learning self-defense. At Israel Forever, we have a program called Israel Strong, trying to encourage people to learn the lessons from Israel. Because the reason I feel more safe here in Israel with all of those border conflicts, and by the way, you have to mention also the ongoing terror. In the last week, we have had 178 terror attacks foiled. That's in 1 week. There have been over 4,000 terror attack attempts since October 7th. If we did not have a security force, then we would have hundreds of thousands dead by now. So I feel safer here. I do think that every Israeli is afraid. We're living in fear, not necessarily just from the missile fire, but because you don't know who to trust in the streets. I live in a community where we're surrounded by forests, and I don't have a fence, and I don't have a gate. And so we all are living with an October 7th awakening moment of seeing that gate torn open. So, it looks easy, it's not, but torn open so easily, and the infiltration into local communities. There is not a mother or a father right now who does not have nightmares every night thinking who could be coming in and what would they be doing to us. Now, mind you, if you look in Hebron in 1929 in the riots against the Jews, very famous Arab riots against the Jews, by the way, it was the Arabs against the Palestinians in 1929. The Jews were considered Palestinian. Arabs refused to be identified as Palestinians. I just give you that as a side fact. But in 1929, what was the method of rape? It was the brutal, dismembering murders like we've learned about from October 7th. So when we talk about a feeling of safety for Jews here in Israel, we are able to give ourselves that sense because our sons and our friends' sons are out there fighting for our freedom. We're able to, as they always say, my friend Dina, she has 3 sons in Gaza, and they say, we are fighting so that you can have your Shabbat dinner in peace. We are fighting so that you can have a wedding. We are fighting so that we can have Purim. But then again, this is a country in mourning, and this is a country afraid. However, it is Jews around the world, and I know most of your listeners are around the world. They are afraid, and they need more people to make them feel confident and safe and welcome, and that our Jewish rights are worth something. When everybody in the world fights for human rights, where do Jewish human rights fall? So Jews who try to just not be afraid, it's great, but we are really living kind of in a limbo there. We don't want to believe that it could get worse, but I think we all kind of know that it's also very hard to stop what has begun right now.
Haman is gone. Hitler is gone. Do you think God will deal with Hamas?
I think that God is allowing Israel to be his hand of action to deal with Hamas. I don't believe all of Hamas will be entirely wiped out because of how effective they have been in their propaganda schemes and using the thousands-year-old traditional anti-Semitic tropes to feed the next generation of Jew hatred. Whether or not they will be under the politicized name of Hamas as the organization, I don't know. But they will regurgitate themselves in some new form. They will be reborn in some new organization if they don't stay Hamas. But here's something biblical for you. It says in the Torah, and Hamas will be wiped out from your land. And in the morning when we pray, one of our prayers, it says, and we should wipe all Hamas out of our land. We should not be impacted by. Hamas is a term from the Bible that the Arab world took upon themselves as a legitimate name. It just happens to be the word for evil. So will God deal with Hamas? He is using, just like, God used Mordechai and Esther to enact his will and stop the hand of Haman, the IDF, the proud nation state of Israel, and even, I don't care how you feel about him. Nobody loves Bibi Netanyahu right now. But put your feelings aside and think in a almost biblical sense. Every country needs a leader. That leader needs to be able to stand strong and be a hand of God. Do I think that Bibi is a hand of God? No, but he's a conduit. Just like Moses once was, and I'm not comparing, God forbid, Bibi and Moses. I'm only saying in every generation, if an Amalek rises, also there has to be a leader who has to bear the brunt of the challenges faced in fighting for the spiritual survival of humanity. And I think Israel, and right now, okay, so Bibi's the head of that, but all of what Israel is doing right now is the hand of God. And the hand of Hamas, and what they did on October 7th and continue to do, most people probably right now wouldn't realize that this morning there were already 40 missiles in the north. Yesterday there were 80 last night. I was in the south yesterday, and there were several missiles in the morning, right where I was. The missile fire doesn't stop. So, this is an ongoing war. Just because Israel is dropping the bombs doesn't mean we are the evil. We are uprooting the evil. And I think even those bombs provided by the military, provided by the United States, that is also part of God's plan.
What's your prayer for Purim this year?
My prayer for Purim is that we will have a miracle and have our hostages come home. I don't believe there's anybody who has any other prayer right now. I know we all have more prayers than that we wish the United States government and would wake up. I know that just today it was announced in the UK, a very severe punishment was just announced for anti-Semitic behavior. That's very important. Again, also, is that an act of the will of God? We hope so. But I think that, and we want our soldiers home safely. We want the world to wake up to our desire for peace. Peace is not owned by one side of this conflict. If anything, peace really historically has been shown to be the one desire of the Jewish people. So our hope is that our hostages will come home, that the hearts of those who are aching shall be soothed, and that this war be brought to an end by the world calling for the surrender of Hamas immediately, and that they should be held accountable for war crimes in international courts.
What's your website for people who'd like to know more about the work that you do?
Absolutely. IsraelForever.org, where you can come and you can understand Israel as a nation, as a history, as a destiny. You can learn about not only the conflict, but beyond the conflict. That you can try to understand what are Jews, why Jews are on this earth, because we are here for the sake of all mankind. And the more people realize it, and the more people welcome and respect Jews, that is when world peace will be possible.
Okay, Elana, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity.